Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Harry.
I'm Sam.
School's back for our political leaders. Today, Parliament will resume 2.5 months after Labor won a convincing victory at the polls. While the government will have more members in its ranks, opposition parties mostly have new faces as their figureheads. In today's deep dive, we'll take a look at what we can expect from the government of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in the next term of Parliament.
So, Harry, Parliament resumes today for the first time since the federal election. How long ago was that? I feel like
79 days,
right,
Sam.
So it's quite a while.
I'm counting. It's been quite some time.
And that's a pretty long winter break compared to how they normally roll out, right?
Well, this parliament's actually earned the nickname of Parttime Parliament because they just have so few sitting days. Obviously, not casting any aspersions here, but it does seem like the election did come at a very convenient time because they have the winter break around this time anyway in the parliamentary calendar. So it's really just extended out quite a lot. But I'm sure many MPs and senators would be listening to this saying, we still work hard even when we're not in Parliament itself, when Parliament's not sitting. So, you know, we're just back to the formalities now.
Would never want to doubt that our parliamentarians work as hard as possible. But why don't we go back 80 days and get a quick refresher on what happened in that election to give us a sense of this new state of play in Canberra?
Yeah, so on the 3rd of May, we had the federal election where Labor won in quite a convincing landslide. So they won 94 out of 150 seats.
Yeah.
And remember, a seat is an electorate, so a certain area of the country that's represented. The coalition had a pretty poor showing on the night, so much so that the leader of the coalition at the time, Peter Dutton, actually lost his seat. I'm sure you remember, Sam. It was quite a big news story on a night of many, many headlines, but that was certainly one of the biggest. And Susan Lee has since become the leader of the opposition, has been interviewed by the Daily Aus, was sitting in that chair since then. And the Greens leader, Adam Bandt, also lost his seat at the election, and he's since been replaced by Senator Larissa Waters. So in that time, there's been a few political dramas, a few developments. We even saw the coalition split up for 8 days.
Yes.
So the Liberal and National parties took a bit of a break. They're back together again.
They've patched things up.
They've patched things up ahead of the Parliament. So they're keen to put forward a united front in opposition to the government now. And the Prime Minister has also announced a reshuffle of the cabinet and the ministry. So we saw a few people, some notable figures actually be removed from the cabinet. So that included the Attorney General Mark Dreyfus and the former Industry Minister Ed Husic as well. So if you look at the House like Skittles, there's a lot of red and a smaller clutch of green and blue for the opposition in this next parliament. And it's going to be really, really stark when they all sit in the chamber. There's going to be a lot of Labor.
Yeah, I kind of imagine that horseshoe shape of those Skittle maps. And you're going to see the government, the Labor Party, really stretch over that bend and almost towards the other side of the chamber now physically. And it's important to remember, though, that we do have a formed coalition as we enter this first day of Parliament. How will today actually work, though, Harry? I mean, what does a first day of school look like in Canberra?
Yeah, so school's back in session. The bells will be ringing. The new MPs and senators will be sworn in, and there'll be a bit of formality just on the first day, just to mark the opening of the 48th Parliament and the 3-year term to follow. So there's going to be ceremonies like a welcome to country, which will be led by First Nations elders. We'll also see a bit of pageantry. So I don't know if you've ever seen those parliamentary officers. For anyone that hasn't, they're usually donned in long black robes with a white, what would you call it?
Like, Captain Feathersword style neck piece.
Yeah, a kerchief of some sort.
A Matt Preston.
He'd be proud. And then we have this position called the Usher of the Black Rod. The rod's just like a scepter. Summoning the members, we'll see the Governor-General, Sam Mostyn, who's also sat in that chair since the election, to be interviewed by the Daily Aus. She's going to deliver a speech in the Senate to welcome the new MPs and senators. Notably, she won't be in the House because that dates back to a very, very old Westminster tradition from the UK. So she can't actually step foot in the House, but she will address all the new members in the Senate. And look, it's all very formal. There will be a new speaker elected in the House, a new president elected in the Senate. It's likely to be the same person from the last term of Parliament, but it's just getting all the formalities out of the way for day one.
And then once all of those formalities are over, then we'll get to the substantive business of actually running the country. Have the government laid out their priorities for this new term? Especially now that we're actually having sitting days. I mean, it's one thing to talk to the electorate about what you're promising in a campaign. It's another thing to say this is what we're talking about on day one.
So the very first day, which will be tomorrow in the sitting calendar, they, being the government, will introduce a bill to wipe 20% off Hex debts.
Okay, so that's kind of the headline change that they want to lead with is that Hex debt thing we promised, we're going to deliver it first thing.
That's right. And someone I was speaking to from the government a little earlier today was very confident that that's going to pass through the Senate as well tomorrow. So that's going to be a quick turnaround, according to them. And that was one of their key election pitches. We heard a lot about reducing the Hex debts, student loans, and all part of this cost of living relief platform that they took to the election. So no surprises there. We knew that was going to be early on in the term. The second piece of legislation actually relates to childcare centres meeting national standards.
Is that directly linked to the news that we've seen over the past couple of weeks to do with the safety of those childcare centres?
Exactly. So in those 79 days, we saw the stories emerge of the alleged child sex offender Joshua Brown, who worked in multiple centres in Melbourne. He's been charged with more than 70 offences now, and more than 2,000 children have been recommended to undergo testing for infectious diseases. Yeah. So you might be thinking, what does this have to do with the government?
Yeah.
The government props up this sector a lot financially. In fact, in the 2023-24 financial year, the government spent $18 billion on subsidies in the childcare sector, and the legislation that they want to introduce would basically see funding cut off from some centres if they're not meeting these national standards. So the government, that's their response to these allegations that we've seen surface in Melbourne.
So I guess you could kind of say that the states and territories are taking a look at this from a registering who's working in these childcare centres, some of the CCTV measures that we've been hearing about. The government's kind of federally coming over the top and saying, well, our power is with the funding. So we're going to kind of approach it from that angle.
That's right. And you touched on something important there, which is that the states and territories are usually the service providers. Yeah. They're the ones that run the childcare centres themselves.
Got it.
But the government is the funding machine behind that, if you like.
Okay, so we've got the HEX reductions. We've got the changes to the way that childcare centres could get their funding. And then third, we're also expecting some legislation on penalty rates.
Yeah, so this one is also a headline and a story that we've seen bobbing away since the start of this year, and that relates to workers' entitlements to penalty rates, which are things like holiday rate, weekends, public holidays, overtime, and this is hooked off a case that we've seen play out in the Fair Work Commission. Basically, some retail, clerical and hospitality industry groups and some big companies supporting them are pushing to bring in a change where essentially a worker could get a higher rate of minimum pay in exchange for waiving some of those penalty rate entitlements. And also things like rest breaks in their award. So an award, just as a quick refresher, are the pay and conditions that you receive as a worker in a specific industry. There are awards specific to the fast food industry, to hospitality, bar staff, that kind of thing. And since this case emerged in the Fair Work Commission, the government's actually put forward its opposition to this basically tit for tat. They say that it shouldn't be a requirement that any worker give up their penalty rates in exchange for even just a baseline higher salary. So what they're doing is they're legislating against any changes to penalty rates. They're saying it's a fierce protection of that holiday pay, that weekend pay, that extra money you might get for having to show up on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And that's just basically their way of saying we oppose what's going on in the Fair Work Commission right now. We want to protect these entitlements down the track.
All right, so we've basically got university students, childcare centres and workers in those specific fields as kind of the ones to be most impacted by the conversations that could play out in Canberra this week. We're going to keep an eye on all three of those legislative agendas. Harry, before we go, let's talk about the opposition for a minute because as you said, we had Susan Lee join us on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and Billy spoke to her a lot about what we can expect from this iteration of the opposition, a depleted opposition. What are you looking out for when you're looking at the opposition over the next couple of weeks in Canberra?
I think it's just really interesting to note from the outset that it's going to be the first time that the Prime Minister faces a female opposition leader in the chair in the lower house.
Because Julia Gillard was the leader of the Labor Party, but never actually the opposition leader.
That's right. She was the Prime Minister, never the opposition leader. So it's going to be the first time that that chair is occupied by a woman. So what I'm going to be looking out for with Susan Lee and the opposition more broadly is just the tone that they strike, because so far there has been an acknowledgement that they got, in Susan Lee's words, smashed at the election, and that a rebuild needs to happen. Her line is that our policies are up for review, but our values are not. So we're still true to our conservative roots, but we're going to have a look at the different items and measures that we take as an opposition to the Australian people. And you know, we're going to see the coalition critique the government. That's their formal role. Yeah. In particular, they've already come out hard against a measure to double the tax rate for superannuation balances above $3 million that the government plans to introduce. We don't exactly know when, but that's just one of the higher taxing let's just say earworms that the opposition wants to put out there. And we know that they are very much opposed to that idea.
Have we heard anything from them on this HEX reduction that is tabled to be the first thing to be talked about?
Yeah, so it's so fascinating because before the election and during the campaign itself, they said that they were opposed to the 20% reduction. And now it appears as though things have shifted within the party. Over the weekend, the Shadow Education Minister, John O'Donian, was asked about whether he was going to support the 20% reduction, and here's a bit of what he had to say.
We're not really in the business of standing in the way of cost of living relief, but I think it is one of those things that Australians wanted, they voted for. We'll go through our process, but I expect this will pass the Parliament.
Talk to me briefly about the Senate. I know that it's sometimes the forgotten chamber, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the House of Reps. Paint a picture for me of the state of play in the red chamber.
Yeah, the Senate, the overlooked child, the middle child, we might say, of the Australian Parliament. So based on the new makeup, Labor has a slightly simpler path to passing legislation in the upper house. They'll need to negotiate with either the coalition or the Greens. In the last term of Parliament, it was a calculus of the Greens plus a few crossbenchers.
Right.
But because Labor picked up a few seats, they won't have to negotiate with those crossbenchers necessarily. And the new Greens leader, Larissa Waters, who's in the Senate, she has said she's going to do things differently.
I am a different person and I bring a different style. I really want to get outcomes. I really want to work with the current government to try to improve people's lives and protect the planet.
It's going to look like a very different Parliament to what we had last time, not least because some of the leaders that we got used to are just no longer there. Adam Bandt lost his seat from the Greens and Peter Dutton lost from the Coalition. There's going to be more Labor members. Those red skittles will be, just
filling up,
rounding that bend.
Yeah.
And then I think it's also important to note that we are going to have the largest proportion of female MPs in Australian political history. It's actually nearly evenly split 50-50. There are going to be 112 MPs and senators who are female and 114 that are male.
Really interesting. It's a new era for the Australian Parliament, and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has a very strong mandate to lead given to him by the Australian public, but no doubt the opposition will be holding the government accountable as they should. Harry, thank you, and look forward to bringing us some more updates from Canberra throughout the year.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Sam.
And thank you for joining us on the Daily Aus this morning. We're going to be back in your ears this afternoon with some headlines. If you got a sec, I'd love you to click follow on Spotify or Apple. Really just helps make our week. We'll be back with those headlines later. Until then, have a great day.